Hurts. Looking. Stepping away from the pressure. Fires to the end zone, and it's incomplete.
And Jim Harbaugh gets his win over Ohio State.
Michigan defeats Ohio State 42-27. Finally.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 79 of Sports Speak. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Lot to get to. Of course, first, got to plug, as always, our NFL Weekly Pick'em, which has turned into basically a disaster for me. I'm at 18-18 somehow. I only lost 10 games last year, and I have 500 record. I'd be just as good flipping a coin every single week. Tim's got a pretty solid lead, but if you want to follow along, you can go to our Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. We've got 6 weeks left in the regular season, but we're joined by a couple people today. We have Rahill Jaiswal here. We also have Ike Busch, so excited to have them both joining the show today, and a lot to get to. It's been actually a very busy last couple of days in the professional sports world. NFL, of course, things picking up. College football just had a crazy rivalry week, but we start in the major leagues where Mlb Free Agency has gotten wild, mainly because there could be a lockout happening as soon as tomorrow. So a lot of free agents want to have their contracts secured and signed before then. And I want to start, obviously, as a Met fan with probably the most shocking deal so far, Max Scherzer joining the Mets. Now, if healthy, if Jacob deGrom is healthy, that is a historic 1-2 with deGrom and Max Scherzer there. And let me just be honest about something, because I know there are people who are critical that Steve Cohen spent a lot of money on Max Scherzer, who's 37 years old, who was dealing with a dead arm in the postseason. But guess what? He won 3 Cy Youngs before, and to see the Mets actually spending money is something they never did in 60 years of this franchise until Steve Cohen took over. Love the guy or hate the guy, whatever Steven Matz's agent did to Steve Cohen somehow lit such a fire in him for him to make all these moves. And I think adding Max Scherzer shows that the Mets really care and want to do things. They're not taking like these stupid risks we've seen in the past, like bringing in Robinson Cano, or Jason Day. They're trying to get real current talent that there's not many questions surrounding. And I know Max Scherzer is getting up there in age, but he's coming off his best career season ERA-wise. So you know what? I'm really happy as a Met fan to see the Mets finally doing what our crosstown rivals, the Yankees, have done for basically a century, using the money, using the space, using the availability to add some players in and make some big moves. And I'm really excited to see what Max Scherzer can do. Ike, I know, is a Mets fan as well, so I'm going to go to him first. What's your feelings on Scherzer and these other deals the Mets have made as well?
Yeah, Eddie, I mean, the first thing I saw when I found out about the Max Scherzer deal was my dad texting me. He said, I guess this is how it feels to be a Yankee fan. And while I don't agree with Yankee fans in that, you know, their team is always bad while they're above 500 and we're sitting below 500 at all times, it's certainly a sigh of relief to get, you know, have a free agency like this after a good free agency last year, getting Francisco Lindor, obviously, you know, other moves that, you know, kind of shocked the world, getting good signings. They got Taijuan Walker for cheap, but to get Max Scherzer is just a whole other deal. And for a guy like Max Scherzer, that's 37 years old, as you said, to have his best, season in terms of ERA, that's an incredible thing to do. And it shows that Scherzer is just not aging like most. And he's just, if anything, getting better. So I think that with Steve Cohen's contract that he offered Scherzer, yeah, it might have been very expensive, but it's a statement to the entire league that says, hey, we're not going to be messed around with because this team is going to win a World Series or at least come close to it. And that's, I think, what he was trying to prove. And adding, of course, the 1-2 punch now with deGrom and Scherzer. Now he's showing that he's willing to spend money. Steve Cohen, after signing 3 incredible, players, 2 outfielders, and a third baseman on Saturday night. It was just, it was Friday night for Black Friday. And it was just so relieving for Mets fans. And now after the Scherzer deal, we are just so relieved. And Max Scherzer is certainly going to continue, I'm sure, his strength at the mound.
So Rahill, I'm going to quote what you texted me yesterday. Of course, you're a Yankee fan, and you said, quote, "I should be angry, but I'm more happy for you Met fans because you guys deserve something for your pain." Now, I know as a Yankee fan, you got to be kind of frustrated too because Brian Cashman has done absolutely nothing over these past few days. But I want to get your take on that, as well as, of course, Scherzer, Marte, and these other big moves that the Mets have made.
Yeah, so I even told you last year, Eddie, that I hoped you guys did something before the season started because, a lot of people like to, make fun of Met fans, and I do it sometimes too, but I do genuinely feel bad because you have one of the best pitchers in Jacob deGrom, and you have talent. The Mets have a lot of talent, but for some reason they can't put it together, but now all of a sudden they've gotten even more talent. Starling Marte, who's unbelievable. He plays all three phases of the game at a high level. He hits well, he gets on base, he steals the base as well, and he's a Gold Glove when he plays the outfield well. Really, nothing more you want. He can do anything you ask of him. And now to get Max Scherzer, I know, and like you said, Eddie, he's 37, yes, but you could honestly make the argument that he is better at 37 than he was at 27 because he's constantly adding pitches to his arsenal, which is making him better, and he's making the adjustments, knowing, I'm not as young as I used to be, but if I keep adding pitches, I can stay around in the league longer. And yeah, it's a lot of money, but this is how the MLB is now. If you're in a big market like New York, you have to spend the money if you want to win. It's not every team can be like the Tampa Bay Rays where they're going out getting these guys for dirt cheap and then developing them to be unbelievable. The big market teams, it's just whoever is willing to spend the most money gets the big players. It's how it is, and it's probably how it's going to be in other sports. Especially, we'll see in the NFL. With all the QB spike, all the money the QBs are going to get. It's just how it works. And as a Yankee fan, yeah, it's frustrating. I never expected Max Scherzer to be in pinstripes, but I did expect at least a move at this point, whether it be a pitcher, whether it be maybe Marcus Stroman or Trevor Story to some extent, Seeger as well. Correa is still out there, but let's be honest, Correa is not going to be a Yankee. He basically spat in the face of Derek Jeter. So Correa is not going to be a Yankee at that point. So I'm still holding out hope, but as a Yankee fan, it's frustrating because you're seeing the Mets who normally it's kind of weird. Normally it's the opposite. Normally you see the Yankees making these moves. Now all of a sudden it's the Mets doing these things. So you see the Mets making moves like Marte, Scherzer, and you got to play him a decent amount of times. You got to play him at least 6-7 times. So it is frustrating to see because you spent the money on Garrett Cole, but who the heck is your number two? Might I add that the Rays actually poached Corey Kluber from you. So you don't even have a number two pitcher at this point in time because Severino, we don't know what the situation with him is. Is he going to be the same after his surgery? I don't know. Yankee fans are hoping Tanaka could maybe sign and come back, but that might be a stretch. So outside of Garrett Cole, who's pitching? Who's number two? And if it's not Stroman, who I would gladly take Stroman at number two, but I don't know. I mean, the biggest move the Yankees have done this year is letting go of Clint Frazier, who just went to the Cubs, and getting rid of Rougned Odor, who went to the Orioles. That's pretty much all they've done. And they traded Tyler Wade, who you could argue that's not a good move because Tyler Wade was actually starting to look like he can actually hit the baseball this season. So it's frustrating. It is very frustrating.
Now, I know when we bring up the Yankees, that can trigger something in Tim's mind that results in like a 5-minute tangent. So I got to hand it to him in a second. But I do want to say one thing. I know the Yankees haven't been active now, but let's not forget at the trade deadline, this team did make 2 pretty significant moves. It's not like they've gone completely dormant for like a year. They brought in both Anthony Rizzo and Joey Gallo for a postseason run that just didn't end up panning out. But it is surprising to see all these big money players going off the board and the Yankees not getting a single one. And in fact, subtracting like you said, with Tyler Wade and with Kluber and Odor, both going elsewhere. So Tim, what's your perspective on that? As well as the Mets, big moves for Max Scherzer and Starling Marte.
Well, first off with the Mets, I mean, I just have to say this, in the aspect of when we talked about last season and what our expectations were for last season for the Mets, we thought the expectations were sky high and really expected to skyrocket. It was honestly, in my opinion, last year, playoffs or bust. I'm not saying the Mets fully busted, obviously had a few injuries and so on, but goodness, I know we're not talking about preseason predictions already, but just based upon this offseason for the Mets through this past weekend, at this point, if this team does not go above 500, does not win the NL East, and does not make it far in the playoffs, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I give the Mets credit. They did everything right. You got an outfielder that can hit, can steal bases, and is a utility player. You turn around, in fact, you really got two of them. You got arguably the best active pitcher in baseball that, honestly, in my opinion, shows the most classical sense of baseball of what we can remember, throwing inning after inning, being relentless and fearless, and continuing to get better and better. Honestly, and I know this is going to sound nuts, outside of maybe Clayton Kershaw and Justin Verlander, who's still in the league, I think the last pitcher we really had that kind of mentality of, I'm going to go far, I'm going to go after, was CC Sabathia. So, in my opinion, the Mets, they got themselves a CC Sabathia in the fact that they've got to eat innings. He gets better as the season goes on. And the only difference is he's a lot better than CC Sabathia. He's had the accolades to prove it. He's a phenomenal pitcher. And by the way, obviously, I know Trevor Bauer opened the door in terms of the money that Scherzer's making this year. But in the aspect of the fact that he's making as much money as he has is definitely well deserved for the kind of caliber pitcher Max Scherzer is. However, in the aspect of the Yankees, you know what? It's tough because I agree with Rahill that, I didn't expect to see Max Scherzer a Yankee, but by now the Yankees should have made a move. I mean, it is infuriating. When you look at it, you needed a number 2 guy. And yeah, the Yankees still have a chance of Marcus Stroman, but I'll put it like this. If the Yankees don't get Stroman, the only other option realistically you have left is Clayton Kershaw. And let's be honest, Kershaw's not coming to New York. He's probably going back to LA. Almost every top caliber starting pitcher has gone somewhere. And the Yankees as well. Forget about that. Forget about the idea that they have to sign, a shortstop, sign a fielder. By the way, the Yankees are going to be stuck yet again with Gary Sanchez because the catcher's market is very, very low. I hear they've been trying to go after Isaiah Kiner Falefa, whatever his name is, on Texas. But that doesn't do anything for the New York Yankees. The Yankees offense, yes, was lackluster last year, but let's be honest, maybe that was a bad year. This team still has the potential of hitting. But the problem for the Yankees last year, you traded away your entire bullpen, let everyone go. Your best pitcher last year was what? Maybe Lucas Wetke, outside, of course, Aroldis Chapman and Jonathan Loaisiga, who might add was a starter converted to a setup man. You don't have any traditional bullpen guys. I mean, when you really think Zach Britton fell apart, we don't know what he's going to be. The Yankees always face the injury bug. And again, if you truthfully believe that Luis Severino, and I hate this about the Yankees, is going to come back and going to be the superstar he was expected to be, you're out of your mind. He needs to be a bullpen piece, in my opinion. You don't know if the man can stay healthy. And just like Loaisiga, for example, it could turn out great, but it doesn't change the fact the Yankees are missing a pitcher. And the fact of the matter is, it still stinks to see they let Masahiro Tanaka go last year. This is a guy that I know left. He's aging towards the end of his career, but he could still pitch productive innings for the Yankees, and they let him go back home. Honestly, if there was one person I'd love to see come back, it would be him. But the realism is that's not going to happen. So as pitchers continue to disappear, the Yankees aren't getting pen pieces. They're going to continue to fall apart. And I'm just going to say it like this. I don't care what offensive player the Yankees get. I don't care if it's Story. I don't care if Correa shocks the world and turns into Alex Rodriguez, being the most hated player in baseball, then turns around, comes to New York, and we're forced to like it. I think the fact of the matter is this, is that New York Yankees baseball is going to be complacent again for another year. And the fact of the matter is this team is not good. It will never be good until changes is made. But we let Aaron Boone come back. We let Brian Cashman pass. So guess what? The Yankees are going to be terrible again next year. Sure, they'll go above 500, but at least we'll lose to the Rays or the Red Sox some point in the playoffs, and it'll be another long season of frustration. But again, not to put pressure, as I did last year, but there's a lot of hope for the Mets. And I really hope the Mets this year go further than the Yankees, because my goodness, has this offseason been a disappointment.
First of all, that was great. But I just got to be honest here. Once again, they're going to be terrible. They're probably going to win 88 games. They're probably going to get into the wild card game. I mean, it's not going to be that bad.
But which is great. But what does it mean if you don't win a World Series? You haven't seen a World Series since 2009. Sure, you've came close in ALCS a couple times, but the Mets have seen a World Series since 2015. Their pitching staff now is arguably better than that team. And let's not forget this too. Yes, the Mets had a bad season offensively last year, but let's not act like 2 seasons ago this team led Major League Baseball in batting average. The Yankees can't do any of that.
Okay.
Other than home runs, that's it.
Okay, but maybe my expectations are skewed a little bit from you. And the Yankee fans also, you have 27 World Series.
Yankee fans are spoiled. That's the best way to put it. So
yes, as a Mets fan, making the playoffs at all is a big accomplishment. Even back in 2016, when they lost that game in heartbreaking fashion in a wild card game and were 1 and done against the Giants with Ty Kelly starting at third base in a playoff game, that was an accomplishment to me. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I think it's very crazy how the roles have sort of reversed from a couple of years ago. The Mets are the team that are spending. The Yankees are the team that are letting people slip away, letting talented players on their roster walk that they probably could have kept for a cheap rate. And it's very weird how that dynamic has happened. But I want to talk about the rest of the league. And I'm going to go to Ike first in this. Of course, there's been a lot of other moves this offseason. Noah Syndergaard going to the Angels as one, Robbie Ray going to Seattle, the Rangers making a couple big splashes with Simeon and Corey Seager. What have you seen as the biggest surprise outside of New York so far in free agency?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of surprises, like, just refreshing Twitter and Instagram at all times and just seeing all of these big names going elsewhere. And it's just really surprising to me. But the thing that shocked me the most out of all of these was the Corey Seager to the Rangers. Now, the Rangers got Corey Seager to play shortstop, and they signed him on a 10-year deal, which pretty much will use whatever's left in him, or at least most of it, because for 10 years, I mean, he's going to be out towards late 30s. So Corey Seager, they must have known, is their guy, and he certainly has shown that he could play some great baseball, both offensively and defensively, and he showed that in the postseason. He's just an incredible hitter and defender, and all around and a leader in the clubhouse. But it surprised me that the Rangers are being so aggressive. And I'm going to say the Rangers have surprised me the most because, getting him and Marcus Semien as well. It's just been a bold kind of offseason for them. And John Gray at pitcher, it's been awesome to watch the Rangers. And growing up, in my first World Series I remember was the Cardinals taking on the Texas Rangers. That's the first World Series I remember, and I watched it. An incredible ending. David Freese, you guys, I'm sure you all know the ending, but just an awesome World Series. And they haven't really been the same since. They've only made the playoffs a few other times, and they've been among the worst in the league in the past few years. So I'm glad to see the Rangers showing that they're a team that is worth, fighting against, and a team that could spark a better season. And they're on the up and up for sure, the Texas Rangers. So getting big signings and signing guys like that, like Corey Seager, I love the signing, but it was definitely bold and shocking for me to see that the Rangers are back in business. And maybe this won't be their year to get into the playoffs or make a run necessarily, but I'm glad to see that they're aggressive and they're taking the steps that they need to become a contender in the next few years.
Rahill, how about you? Your biggest surprise so far?
I mean, I was just looking at the contracts, and I think for Javier Baez, I think the more for Detroit is they gave him an opt-out only after 2 years. So he's on a 6-year deal. He can opt out after 2. So I'm just surprised that Detroit even gave him an option to opt out. I honestly thought there would be like a Bryce Harper situation and no opt-out, sort of no trade clause thing, but they give him the opt-out after 2 years. So it's very possible that 2 years from now, if Baez is not happy in Detroit, they could see him go. And like I said, 6 years, $140 million, they can see him walk after 2 years. So I was just a little surprised that they decided to give him an opt-out deal that quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's amazing that the Tigers have they've been such a bad team over these last few years, and they're making big moves. They bring in him, Eduardo Rodriguez, but people forget that this team does have a decent sized payroll compared to some of the other teams. Just think about a few years ago when they had Verlander, Scherzer, Porcello, David Price, and Yoenis Cespedes, in addition to Miguel Cabrera, all on that team at one time in 2014. So, there's a lot of talent up and down on that roster. as well right now. I think there's some production that's coming up from the minor leaguers. Casey Mize, I think, is going to become a star pitcher in the future, even though he struggled a little bit. Akil Baddoo was a big deal when he came up back in April, and he had a nice rookie season as well. So there's a lot of depth on that team, and the fact that they're willing to spend, I think, is nice. And this is a team as well that really performed above expectations. They've been so brutal the past few years, and last year finished only 4 games below 500. So there's serious potential with them, especially with the AL Central being, let's be honest, pretty bad aside from the Chicago White Sox. But let's shift to the NFL, because I'm ready for this as an Eagles fan. I have not one, not two, but 3 Giants fans sitting here right now, ready to belittle me after Sunday's game. And I have to talk about the Eagles here, because this was a chance. They are 5-6. They have stayed afloat. They have had an absolutely horrendously difficult schedule to start the season. They've had to play the Chargers, the Bucks, the Chiefs, the Saints, the Raiders, you name it. They've had to play almost every tough team during the stretch, a lot of those games on the road. Now you come to a 5-game stretch before the finale in Dallas, where you get the Giants twice, Washington twice, and the Jets. Those are games that the Eagles need to capitalize on if they want to be legitimate playoff contenders. You're 5-6. You're right on the brink with there being 7 playoff spots. And what do? They lay a complete egg on offense. They score 7 points. Jalen Reagor drops not one, but 2 game-winning, wide-open touchdown passes in the end zone in the final minute of the game. The defense did a great job. The offense couldn't do anything. Jalen Hurts was running for his life like he does every game when he has to play against a pretty solid defense. The Giants have a pretty good defense. I will give them that. Patrick Graham does a nice job with that defense. There's definitely some talent there. But even still, the Eagles need to be able to score more than 7 points. They had numerous chances. There were bad decisions. That Jalen Hurts interception in the second quarter was embarrassingly bad. And then he tops it off with another one right before halftime when they're on the brink of scoring. I didn't want to judge, and I think me and Tim talked about this on an earlier show this season. I didn't want to judge Jalen Hurts too early into the season because I still thought of him as a rookie. Like, this was his rookie season because he only started 4 games last year. He only appeared in 6. So he didn't have much experience going in. This was really like his rookie year. But we're seeing rookie quarterbacks from the 2021 draft class surpassing him in skill level, specifically Mac Jones. And I think it's really proving that Jalen Hurts is not the answer for this Eagles team. It's just really frustrating because this could have been an easy game. You score 1 more touchdown. Suddenly you're 6-6. They would have been sitting in a playoff spot going into week 13. And it's really frustrating as an Eagle fan to see this happen. But the Giants kind of luck out there and get that win. So I'm going to go to Tim first. I mean, your perspective on the Giants, the Eagles, this game, and the NFC East, because right now you have Washington currently sitting in a playoff spot and a lot of divisional games between all these teams scheduled throughout December.
Yeah, well, first off, I'll say it like this, and I was telling Rahill during the game, I may never watch a Giants game again because it seems like every time I have to miss a game live, they win. Literally, this is the 3rd time this season this has happened. The win against Oakland, I forget the win against Carolina, and now this one. So needless to say, I've witnessed only 1 victory and from afar have listened to 3 victories. But needless to say, for the Giants, I mean, a little bit of a breath of fresh air. Obviously, you let go Jason Garrett last week, and this team offensively still needed a restart, needed a refreshing moment. You saw Kenny Galladay get 7 targets, even though I think he only caught the ball 3 times for 50 yards, which is underwhelming. Barkley made 1 big run, and then other than that, it was really an offensive day where they tried mixing up the ball and giving it to everyone. And give the Giants credit, they were productive, but the same problem continues for New York week in, week out. Granted, don't get me wrong, the Eagles defense this year in the secondary, which is, might add, have been highly criticized over the past few years, at least in terms of fantasy points as well. They've been somewhat decent this year, so I'll give them that credit. But the fact of the matter is the Giants offense still just terrible. And really, it did come at a cost this week because Daniel Jones, at least from my understanding, will not be playing next week. It'll be Mike Glennon. So that means, and you complimented the Giants defense, expect it to be absolute disaster against Miami. In fact, I'm so convinced it's going to be absolute disaster. Miami's going to probably put up 40 points because the defense is and a snap, gone. It happens every single week for the Giants. You see a bright spot, team plays great. Following week, they take a step down. And good football teams tend to step up. Now, I'll say it like this for the Eagles. I'm just going to be honest. Team's not a good football team. You've had a hope of an offensive line for years that's aging. You traded away Zach Ertz. You didn't improve the team outside of a wide receiver position of Devontae Smith. But at the end of the day, this team's got to be a lot better if you want to compete with Dallas. And I know a lot of people have overhyped Dallas for years, but the difference this year with the Dallas Cowboys is that they're playing offense to a very high level. Very few defenses can stop them. It's very easy to stop the Philadelphia Eagles offense, and it was very apparent last year when you look at it for Jalen Hurts. I mean, he goes from a game where he can complete 30, 40 passes, and then he's lucky if he can even complete 25% of his passes the game after. It's an on and off type of deal for Hurts, and it's unfortunate to see. But for the Eagles, that's a concern moving forward. So that being said, yeah, great win for the Giants. It'll probably be a terrible loss next week. And for Philadelphia, I mean, again, we'll see. It's the NFC least for a reason. Still anything can happen. But when it's all said and done, I mean, it's a disappointment for Philadelphia because you thought you had the answer, and there continues to be inconsistency week in, week out. This team needs someone, in my opinion, better under center. Alabama quarterbacks historically have not done well. Obviously, Tua. Now, Mac Jones doing great, but we'll see what happens. But obviously, Tua, another example. So we'll see what happens.
And, I hate having to keep harping back to this with the Eagles, but and I know it's hard to scout sometimes with drafting, but how can it be this bad that back-to-back years, first they take J.J. Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf, and then take Jalen Reagor, who legitimately cannot catch NFL passes, in the first round over Justin Jefferson, who goes ahead and sets an NFL record for receiving yards for a rookie. How do you possibly even do that back-to-back years? The Eagles right now, and I think I talked to Rahill about this as well, they still wouldn't be complete because Jalen Hurts is still the quarterback and there's still a problem there. But the Eagles could very easily right now have a receiving core of Justin Jefferson, DK Metcalf, and Devontae Smith as their 1, 2, and 3. Devontae Smith would be your 3 suddenly, and they just don't. And that's in large part because of ownership. And like Tim was saying with the Yankees not wanting to make any changes and being complacent, the Eagles ownership-wise and with the general management with Howie Roseman don't want to make those changes. Sure, they'll make changes with personnel and with coaches, but they won't look up above into the front office. But I want to ask you, obviously, the Giants, Tim was a little bleak about them here going forwards against Miami, especially if Daniel Jones is hurt. How would you assess this team after picking up that win over the Eagles?
Well, first of all, it's great to be among 3 Giants fans. And in my friend group, we're about even between Cowboys fans, Eagles fans, Giants fans. But it's good to be here. I'm sorry, Eddie, about the loss, but we're going to have to talk about the Giants as a team that probably isn't who many people think that they are. And, some say they're years away from contention, but I think that they're a little bit better than that. I do think that, under center, obviously Daniel Jones, such a huge problem at some points, and he could be so great other weeks. But, I think that they're closer than some people think. They're a good offensive line away and about a better quarterback, certainly, away from playoff berth. But, I don't think it's this year or next year, but I think that they, led by a guy like Kadarius Toney, developing Andrew Thomas, Blake Martinez at the center of your defense, and then a guy like Leonard Williams, who's just so good. And, James Bradbury, who's a little bit old, but on your cornerback, still a worse year than last year, but still putting up pretty good stats for the Giants. I think last week was a good sign for the Giants. Now, I don't think they're playoff contenders. I don't even think they're better than anyone in the NFC East at this moment. But I do think that they have shown signs that in the future they could be good. Now, I will also say that the Eagles and the Giants are in very similar situations. The fact of the matter is they both don't have the guy they drafted. Now, the guy they drafted, what they thought is that mobile guy that could hit the passes, that could, he's got good pocket presence, he's got good poise, and that's just hasn't happened between both their quarterbacks. They've had struggling offensive lines. Their defense, though, shown signs of, hints of greatness or whatever you want to call it, is still not great. It's hard to say whether, which team is better at the moment because they're both so similar. I see signs of each team within each other, and it's actually pretty cool. They've got the running back that keeps getting injured, the young running back, and some may say Miles Sanders doesn't get enough workload. I happen to agree with that, but a guy like Saquon Barkley, who is always injured because of the lack of offensive line production and the lack of skill on that offensive line. It's just unfortunate that they're missing their opportunities and wasting such good young talent. And you'd hate to see that with a guy like Kadarius Toney and Saquon Barkley on your team. Both shown great signs. Offensive Player of the Year, Saquon Barkley, Offensive Rookie of the Year, when he entered. And now Kadarius Toney, he's been injured in his rookie year as well, but he's been great from what we've seen. So I think that the Giants and Eagles are in similar situations, and I do think that each of them has a lot of stuff to work on, but they're both closer to, making the playoffs or going a little further with the 7-team format in the next few years than I had thought maybe even before the year started. So a big win for the Giants this week over the Eagles. The Eagles did not play well. The Giants didn't play too well either, but a lot of it was, the Jalen Reagor issue. But I mean, the game could have went either way, but I think both teams didn't play their best game. And it's going to be a tough win against Miami next week for sure.
I saw Rahill smirk a little bit when you mentioned Miles Sanders. I remember how frustrated you get when he's on your fantasy team and the Eagles don't give him touches. And that's another problem that I have. And I don't know if this is with Nick Sirianni or if this is even the front office or his coordinators, but the Eagles have running backs that can be successful. I don't want to talk about what happened with Boston Scott in that possession with 2 minutes left, but he's typically reliable. Miles Sanders is a very talented back. And of course, Jalen Hurts is a running quarterback. They don't have many design runs with Hurts, and they don't hand the ball off that much. And you have to make use of that when, aside from Dallas, Goedert, and Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts does not have any other reliable targets that he can trust to catch a pass. And that's one of the reasons the Eagles offense stalls out on so many occasions. And it could be really aggravating to see that happening over and over again. But stay with us here on SportsBeat. Coming up, we're going to play a little calm or concerned about some NFL teams, and then talk about this crazy college football playoff rivalry week that just happened. So we've got Rahill, Jaiswal, and Ike Busch here, Eddie Kalegi with Tim Moore here on SportsBeat. So we're continuing here on SportsBeat. We've got Ike Busch and Rahill Jaiswal here joining Tim and I, and we played this a couple weeks ago, and I want to do it again here with a slightly larger panel. Calm or concerned? Because this has been a year of a lot of ups and downs for several NFL teams. And I'm going to go to Rahill first, and we've just been talking about the NFC East. I want to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. They played in a wild game against the Raiders on Thanksgiving. By the way, the most watched regular season game in the NFL in almost 30 years. So kudos to them. Really exciting game. I watched it till the end, and the Raiders came out on top. Cowboys have now dropped 3 of their last 4 games, all 3 against AFC West opponents. Thankfully for them, they are done playing AFC West teams this season, but they are starting to look vulnerable after really looking like one of the best teams in the NFL, if not the best, through the first 7 or 8 weeks of the season. So are you calm or concerned about the Cowboys going forwards?
I'd honestly say I'm concerned. And here's why. First of all, Mike McCarthy tested positive. Now they got a COVID outbreak running through him. So they got to play Thursday night against New Orleans, but they'll probably still get the win. But COVID outbreak doesn't make it any easier. And also, this, I don't know what I sometimes don't know what it is with the Cowboys because, everyone is prone to bad games, like there's a reason teams don't go 16 and 17 and 0. It's because everyone eventually is going to have a bad game. Every single team this year has had 1 or 2 bad games. So when the Cowboys got blown out by the Broncos, I wasn't too concerned. But then you lose to the Raiders on Thanksgiving, and this Raiders team is not the team that started 5-2. This was a team that, might I mind you, that the Giants were able to beat, okay? And we just had a little discussion about the Giants here. There's no way that the Cowboys should be losing to a team that the Giants held to 16 points, all right? Their defense looked extremely vulnerable. I don't know what it is about Deshaun Jackson, but he just loves playing the Cowboys. And again, these guys, I don't know. These guys just keep getting Amari Cooper. He's not vaccinated. So is there a possibility maybe that he has another situation where he has to miss a couple games? I don't know. CeeDee Lamb, we'll see if he should be back. He should be back. And Michael Gallup is just coming off the IR. So you can't expect Gallup to all of a sudden go 7 for 100 every game because he's coming off the IR. And Zeke is still a question mark. Zeke is extremely inconsistent. We sometimes see him look like the old Ezekiel where he hits the hole, he smashes up. And then there's times where he looks like he's running through quicksand. So I really don't, and I'm still not 100% bought into this defense. I am still not 100% bought in. I know Micah Parsons is unbelievable, but I'm still not bought in 100%. And, you want to play your best when you're coming down the stretch. I heard, people say this on Monday night. It's not about, honestly, who has the best record at this point. It's just who's playing the best football. And honestly, you can make the argument that Washington right now is playing the best football in that division, which is absolutely insane to think about. But it is, and Dak Prescott is not playing like he's being paid. He's being paid as one of the highest QBs in the league, and he's not producing those numbers. So I actually say I'm pretty concerned with the Cowboys.
Let's shift to the AFC about another team that's falling apart, and that's the Tennessee Titans, who were looking like, aside from that one game against the Jets, that they were going to run away with the number 1 seed potentially in the conference. So they have more injuries. A.J. Brown just landed in the IR. Of course, no Derrick Henry, no Julio Jones. Their offensive line is beaten up. They just got blown out essentially by the New England Patriots. So are you calm or concerned about the Tennessee Titans?
If there was a panic button, I would hit it right now. I'm so concerned about the Tennessee Titans. Just the fact that they've lost games that they should have won by, not just by a little bit, they should have won by a lot. They lost to the Jets. And early on in the season, and then they ended up beating some great teams. But this is just such an inconsistent team. 1 week they look like the best team in the NFL, and you'll see the power rankings updated with the Tennessee Titans sitting at number 1. And then the next week, they're down to number, 11 in the power rankings because they can't beat a simple team, like the Jets or the Jaguars or something. Like they are so offensive reliant. They have 3 absolute studs in their offense who are all currently injured. A.J. Brown first, who's just so good, young, promising talent. Some say better than DK Metcalf, same draft class, actually same college team as well from Ole Miss. And he's just so good. He's big. He's sort of like a Julio Jones type of player. And he hasn't seen the field much because of his injury. And when he hasn't gotten the workload that, that maybe we'd expect him to early on in the season. Julio Jones, we all know, one of the best the entire, last 10 years, Julio Jones, from the Falcons now to the Titans, one of the best wide receivers of all time, but he just hasn't seen the field that much because of injuries as well. And he really hasn't gotten the ball too much either. And then, of course, Derrick Henry, I'll take back what I said. He definitely gets the ball plenty, but now that he went down, they're a little bit, they're on a deserted island now. They have to figure out what they're going to do because they're stranded. They have Ryan Tannehill, who doesn't necessarily have the best arm, the most accurate arm at all, but he's a good leader on offense, and he'll do when he's got his weapons. Now that he's missing his weapons, he's got someone like Adrian Peterson as his starting running back. And then, the defense, which is not always great. I think it's definitely time to panic if I'm the Tennessee Titans because this team should be doing a lot better. And that's what they were expecting when they signed an old guy like Julio Jones. They seemed like they're going in for a win now kind of mindset. And now, losing all of them is, Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, and of course, Derrick Henry. That's definitely a concern for the Tennessee Titans, and it's definitely going to haunt them in the next few games. And it's definitely tight in the AFC. They've got the Colts right on their tail. They've got, a lot of wild card teams in the hunt. So there's not a clear-cut passage for the Tennessee Titans to make the playoffs. In the NFC, they'd probably make it. But in the AFC, it's definitely going to be a hard way to get in. And I'm not sure if they could do it. They definitely have to step up their game. Definitely a concern of a team for me.
Yeah, and they got to watch out for the Colts. The Colts were 0-3 and losing in their 4th game to the Dolphins and have just completely turned things around, almost beat Tampa Bay last week, and they've been rolling. But Tim, let's stay in the AFC and talk about a team that has been maybe the most inconsistent team in the NFL this year. The Baltimore Ravens, who have gone back and forth and played an absolute disastrous Sunday night football game against the Browns. Lamar Jackson throws 3 interceptions in the second quarter. They were fortunate that the Browns became the Browns. Well, yeah, and Lamar threw his 4th pick in the third quarter. So he had 4 picks for the game, which was really unconventional for him. They barely beat Cleveland. We've seen this team lay an egg against Cincinnati, lose to the Raiders in overtime, almost lose to the Bears last week. Yet they're still hanging around, and still with the way the AFC has been, seem like one of the favorites to get the number 1 seed. So right now, are you calm or concerned about this Baltimore Ravens team?
Compared to who we've just talked about, of the Tennessee Titans, which you have to remember, in my opinion, still very well could win the AFC South if the Colts streak comes to die, over the next few weeks. I'm going to have to say I'm still somewhat calm in terms of the AFC future of the Baltimore Ravens. And I know it sounds insane. Lamar Jackson, 4 interceptions. I mean, terrible. He stepped down these last 2 seasons since that MVP campaign that we've all come to remember, which feels like it's been so long ago. I still view it like this. And for the record, this past weekend was terrible for all quarterbacks that we can make arguments that could play the running back position. Jalen Hurts being the other one. No pun intended there, Eddie. But it's the aspect of, again, we've seen quarterbacks not really have good weeks that have been mobile over really, honestly, the last 2 weeks in the NFL. Not that is any trend to say anything, but we've seen teams really step up and start to get better. I mean, let's not forget about this. Granted, Patrick Mahomes isn't a mobile quarterback, but we can't undermine the fact that Patrick Mahomes has had a terrible season to this point. And the Kansas City Chiefs, who we thought were going to be Super Bowl contenders yet again, for example, have not been what they've been expected to be. So again, football's been unpredictable. Our records and our pick'ems prove it. But for Baltimore still, I mean, the Browns still confuse me. They show life, then they don't. That defense and that secondary is as inconsistent as it gets. I mean, you force 4 interceptions, against Lamar, who is a threat, don't get me wrong, on any game, granted of his quote unquote lack of consistency. But I mean, again, there's nothing in the AFC that North, at least, that scares me. The Steelers are far from scary. I mean, we're talking about potentially benching Ben Roethlisberger come this week, and you look at the rest of the division. I mean, the Bengals, they started off so great. And it feels like this team is still quiet under the radar. They played good football, for the record. I just don't know if they're still good enough to win a division. I know Jamar Chase is great. I know Joe Burrow is a once-in-a-generation quarterback. But, again, I just don't know if they're good enough to beat Baltimore. And, again, it stinks to say it because Baltimore has struggled against tough teams or bad teams. And they've showed up to the occasion against good teams. But so has a lot of teams in the NFL this year. And when you compare other teams that are division leaders or competing for a playoff spot in the AFC, it's crazy to think, but Baltimore is, quote unquote, stepped up to the occasion more than most of the teams in AFC, unfortunately. And again, this season's going to continue to get unpredictable. 17 weeks, it makes the season 1 week longer, but it also makes it a heck of a lot more hectic. So moving forward, for Baltimore, there has to be some urgency, but I still don't think I'm really concerned in the perspective of them not making the playoffs. I think this team is going to make the playoffs no problem and potentially be an AFC contender because no matter, honestly, and I'll say this about the NFC too, no matter who makes it, I mean, I can't circle Super Bowl contender at this anymore. Maybe the Bucs and Tom Brady in the NFC South, because let's be honest, we can't ever count out Tom Brady. But in the AFC, I can't circle someone because as soon as someone gets real hot and they look like they're playing well, they fall apart. So really, we'll find out in the last 3 weeks of the season, and then maybe we'll have a definitive idea of who's going to go to the Super Bowl this year in the AFC side.
AFC is crazy. I mean, I think there's legitimately about 7 or 8 teams that could feasibly win the AFC championship this year. And it's just everybody, like you said, you start to feel good and confident about a team, and then they'll lose to the Jets or Houston or something. And then your opinions will completely change. I gave myself a team here for calm or concerned as well. I'm taking the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm going to say that I'm concerned still. I know they've won a few games in a row. I know the record is looking a little better than it did beginning in the season. but they only put up 13 points against the Packers. They only put up 19 points against the Cowboys. They barely beat Dallas, like when Rahill said. They are so depleted in their receiving core and injured. And then they barely beat Green Bay when Jordan Love is at quarterback and his mother is sitting all the way in the top row of Arrowhead Stadium. So it's concerning for the Chiefs and the Giants too. The Chiefs nearly lost to the Giants as well. And Patrick Mahomes nearly gave that game away, scrambling backwards and losing like 15 yards and a sack with like 2 minutes left in the game. So I think they're still concerned, despite the way the record looks. They're going to win the AFC West. I feel like that now. The Chargers, I don't even know what to say because Justin Herbert's playing really well, but the rest of the team is not hanging up the bargain for him. Denver, I don't care what the record is. That's still a bad football team. And the Raiders have just had too many things go wrong this year, and they just don't have enough talent to make up for that and stay afloat. Not saying those teams won't make the playoffs, because I can almost guarantee you that there's going to be one other AFC West team that gets into the wild card, but the Chiefs are going to win the division. It's about how far they can go. I know this team has playoff experience, but Lamar Jackson is due to perform in the postseason. The Bills got some experience last year and could make a run. I legitimately think any of the AFC North teams are capable. I know Cleveland's been bad, but they were there last year. Pittsburgh, maybe Ben Roethlisberger catches fire. Let's not forget, I know he looks awful out there and he looks like a walking corpse, but let's be honest. He started 11-0 with this football team last year, and I know they collapsed, but Big Ben played really well and clutched up for that team last season. And maybe if they gave him some rest, maybe he could get things going. Tennessee, we know what they can do, and they're still winning games despite all the injuries. I know things haven't gone well these last 2 weeks, but they lost Henry quite a while back now, and they were still able to build up some consistency before these last couple of weeks. And the Colts are looking good too. I think there's too many good teams to really say that the Chiefs are legitimate contenders. And for that reason, when we were expecting the Chiefs maybe to go back to the Super Bowl for a third year in a row, I've got to be concerned about them right now. But let's shift to the college landscape. Just over an hour ago, recording this Tuesday night, they released the college football playoff rankings. Of course, a lot of shakeups from rivalry weekend, which, might I say, may have been one of the most compelling college football weekends we've had in recent memory, between the Iron Bowl, Michigan, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, the coaching moves with Lincoln Riley losing to Oklahoma State and just jetting off to USC for a job there. Brian Kelly shockingly leaving Notre Dame and going to LSU. Spencer Rattler transferring. There's been so much that has happened in the last few days. But the rankings right now, Georgia's still number one. Really no discrepancy with that. Michigan jumps to number 2 with their big win over Ohio State. Alabama hanging on to 3, but I'll emphasize hanging on, as they barely escaped against Auburn and were saved by Bigsby running out of bounds with 1 minute and 43 seconds left in regulation in that game. And then Cincinnati hanging onto a playoff spot. Glad the committees recognize them. They're in 4th with Oklahoma State and Notre Dame just behind. But Ike, this was a wild weekend in college football. And of course, it all starts with Michigan taking down Ohio State. Obviously, I go to Rutgers. I know a lot about Big Ten football, and I love seeing Ohio State lose. I'm not a big Michigan fan either, but Michigan's never made the Big Ten title game before since 2011. This is Harbaugh's first time beating Ohio State. It does feel good for them to see them overcome a Buckeyes team that was so hyped up that it just scored 49 first-half points against Michigan State. I think it's cool to see Michigan taking down Ohio State. So my question to you, really your perspective from that game, and do you think they could be legitimate contenders in the college football playoff?
Well, I was at the Rutgers game this weekend, and I was with my friend, I said, hey, go check the score of the game. And he said, well, Michigan's winning 10-0. And I was like, check again. There's no way Michigan's beating Ohio State. This is unbelievable. And yeah, Michigan played one of the best games I've ever seen them play. I mean, this is a team that lost to Rutgers in 2014. They completely turned over the program. Harbaugh has been awesome for Michigan, and they just look so much better, and progressively through the years just become better and better. And this year, I think, is their peak, or at least I think so. And they just look so good. To be able to beat Ohio State, I know they had the home field advantage, but to be able to beat Ohio State, and not just by the slimmest margin, they beat them by a good amount too. that was a statement, and that was amazing. And I think they are totally deserving of that number 2 ranking, and they could totally compete for the college football championship because they are scarier than any team in the entire NCAA, out of any team in the NCAA right now, because Michigan Michigan is putting out a warning sign to everyone. They have their game against Iowa for the Big Ten championship. So I think that says a lot. The game against Iowa, and we don't think, we know Iowa isn't incredible. They're not an amazing college football team. They're certainly great, and they certainly deserve the West of the Big Ten. But I don't think that they deserve to come anywhere near Michigan, at least at this point. And I think that Michigan should completely lay it on Iowa when they play for the Big Ten championship. And that would completely reassure me that, Michigan is the team to beat, or at least one of the teams to beat. But I think that would assure, mentally send out the signal to everyone that this is the team that will beat Alabama. This is the team that will beat Georgia. And no one has any reason to not to believe that, because after their win against Ohio State, they just proved that they're super good, and they just now need to keep up that reputation and hold that 2 spot for now.
Well, I hope so, but I've seen in the past too, Michigan their way out of the picture, and Iowa's a good team. Iowa was ranked number 2 in the country earlier this year before they lost to Purdue, and we saw Northwestern give Ohio State a big test when they were big time underdogs in that Big Ten championship game last year at Lucas Oil Stadium. So you never know, but honestly, as a Big Ten fan, I want to see a team from the conference compete for a championship. And it's nice to see someone other than Ohio State do it, because of course there are people in the South who will say the SEC is just far superior, and maybe it is. And then there's others who will still try to argue that the ACC is better than the Big Ten, which is not. But that being said, the Big Ten, I want them to get proper representation. I want them to be able to prove that they are one of the elite conferences in college football. And seeing another team aside from Ohio State make that run, the reason why the SEC is so hyped up is because despite it seeming like it's always just Alabama, it's not. You have Georgia number 1 right now. LSU won a championship 2 years ago. Florida and Auburn both have titles in the past decade. They have different teams that make it into that picture. And it's nice to see another team really getting that shot aside from Ohio State, because we know what the Buckeyes can do. But I think if Michigan can win that Big Ten championship game, I have faith that they can. Little concerned because I've seen how they've played against Rutgers when Rutgers has not been very good over these past couple of years. But that being said, I think Michigan has a serious chance. And if they can win that Iowa game, I think they can really potentially win the college football playoff. I think they have a chance to go head to head with Alabama, with Cincinnati, with Georgia, whoever they play against. And I think it would be kind of a different dynamic than what these SEC teams have seen so far this season. Michigan's a unique team. Hassan Haskins really deserves to be in the Heisman conversation now after scoring 5 touchdowns against Ohio State. And I think Michigan's a really good team. But I want to shift to an SEC rivalry and turn to Rahill, because Alabama-Auburn, what a wild game. 4 overtimes. They went to the crazy 2-point conversion rule. They actually had to go to 2 rounds of that. But eventually Alabama came through. Auburn looked like they had that game in the driver's seat. First time Alabama gets shut out in the first half of the game under Nick Saban, and then they end up coming through. And because Bigsby stepped out of bounds, it gave Alabama and Bryce Young a chance to get down the field. And Bryce Young, the quarterback that he is, found a receiver, tied the game, and you knew at that point they were going to win it eventually in overtime. So it was a test, and Auburn's not a great team. So how do you feel about that one, Rahill? And how do you feel about Alabama's chances in the SEC championship game? And if they end up finding a way to make it into the playoff?
Yeah, it's crazy because we could be sitting here after Saturday and we could see Ohio State, Alabama, and Clemson. Well, Clemson's already out, and so is Ohio State. All 3 of them miss, and Oklahoma as well. All of those schools miss the college football playoff, and maybe this is finally the kick in the groin that the committee needs, maybe to even extend the playoff from 4 to 8 teams, because they want to see those guys in there. But it is a breath of fresh air to have a bunch of different teams. As far as the game goes, I mean, Bryce Young, I mean, that's his Heisman moment right there. 90, backed up on your own 4-yard line, 96 yards. And you look at that last throw is a dime. That's a brilliant throw down the sidelines. And as for Auburn, Bigsby steps out of bounds. That's why they're 6-5. They're 6-5 for a reason. You're like, oh, wow, they're playing so well. How could they be 6-5? Oh, there it is. How many leads have they blown this year? They've blown so many. They've blown so many double-digit leads. And Alabama did the classic thing where they got me hopeful, like, yes, Alabama's about to lose. They're about to be completely out of it, and then they come back and win. I still think Georgia's going to win the SEC championship game just because that defense is so scary. And the fact that Alabama couldn't score through almost basically 3 full quarters against Georgia, that's got to be against Auburn, that's got to be pretty concerning when you go up against the Georgia defense. But I always say this, they're from Atlanta. So there's always the chance that they do some choking because we all know those Atlanta teams like to choke. This is a huge game for Georgia. You could actually make the argument this is more important for Georgia because this is the team they haven't been able to beat. They've always been contenders in the SEC, but they haven't been able to get over the hump, which is Alabama. The national championship, they blew that lead. Then you remember there was the SEC championship game the year after where Jalen Hurts comes off the bench because Tua gets injured, and they come back and win that game. This is Georgia wanted Alabama. They got their chance at it. I think Georgia's going to pull it off, and with 2 losses, I don't know if Alabama can get in because I'm hoping, God, please hope that Notre Dame doesn't get in because I don't want to see them get blown out in the college football semifinal again. It happens every time, but because you got to like Oklahoma State's chances against Baylor, considering Baylor didn't look good against Texas Tech and Oklahoma State was able to pull it off, especially considering they were down 9 entering the 4th quarter against Oklahoma. So I think right now where I'm sitting at, I don't think Alabama will be in the college football playoff come time.
And you mentioned Notre Dame because, first of all, I want them to join a conference if they really want to be in the college football playoff. I'm sick of this, that they're avoiding a conference, that they're in the league of their own, and they think they can just get through and be a top 10 team. They have talent. They have the roster. They can recruit. Then go to a conference and show it. You're in the ACC in almost every other sport. And I know they have these traditional rivalries, but guess what? You don't play 12 conference games. You play 8 or 9. You could still stick Stanford in there. You could still play USC, and then you could play a mid-major school. It's pretty simple. So I don't see why they don't just do that, especially when they're already playing like 6 or 7 ACC games in the first place. So also with the lack of decency with Brian Kelly leaving the team and not telling them, all the players found out on social media that Brian Kelly had accepted the LSU job. He had not told the team yet that he was leaving, and then sent out a very cryptic message to the team the next morning, apologizing that they found out in that way. All of that said, I still don't think Notre Dame's going to get in anyway because they're not playing in a conference championship game, but you never know because a lot of craziness could happen. So I want to finish up with this and turn to Tim because we have the playoff picture right now. Like we said, Georgia, Michigan, Bama, Cincinnati are all in. Seems like all 4 of these teams control their destiny, win and you're in, lose, and then questions happen. I think Georgia is the only team where you could say if they lose to Alabama, you can still feel comfortable they sneak in as a 3 or a 4 seed. Any of these other teams, with the way the committee is, if Cincinnati loses to Houston, obviously they are gone. They are out of the picture. And likely if Texas San Antonio stays undefeated or if they favor Houston, depending on the ranking, Cincinnati might not even get a New Year's Six bowl. So Cincinnati has to win. But I think if they win, they're in the playoff. If Michigan loses, now you have questions. And then, of course, when Georgia beats Alabama, if Georgia beats Alabama, if Bama's got 2 losses, can you feasibly put them in when you have guaranteed either Oklahoma State or Baylor having 1 loss and trying to get in? There's so many different pictures that you can have. Of course, Notre Dame sitting there with 1 loss. It's difficult to really assess because I don't think there's ever been in this playoff era where there's so many teams still in contention heading into conference championship week. And there's so many different ways that it could go. So how do you feel about the current ranking, Tim? And how do you see things panning off this weekend?
This whole season, let's be honest, for college football has been nothing but hectic. And to me, championship weekend, I think it's going to be hectic. I'm going to be honest. Obviously, we know we're going to see Georgia versus Alabama. Really, if Alabama wins, they keep their hopes alive. Obviously, Georgia will keep their hopes alive regardless of what happens, in my opinion. I agree with you in that regard. But, I mean, when you look at it, I mean, Cincinnati, remember when we first talked about this with Josh, and I thought this team was going to potentially, since they were undefeated, earn their respect, they beat, or two ranked football teams, that they would at least get some respect up in the rankings, and yet they currently still sit on the edge of the cut line is a bit concerning for me. Now, I'm not so concerned about Cincinnati, but honestly would not surprise me at all if this team got upset. This weekend, it just wouldn't be much of a surprise for me. But I mean, I don't know what to say about Michigan. Not because I'm an Ohio State fan, but I mean, let's talk about a tale of two stories for a moment. Because when you think about it, this is the same program that was going at Jim Harbaugh's neck just a month ago and wanted him fired because he could never win the big game. But all of a sudden, one win against Ohio State changes that whole picture. And again, I'm not saying by any means they're a threat, but what happened? All of a sudden now he's a hero? All of a sudden now this team is good when it was lackluster because it couldn't beat a top 10 opponent, and then it luckily gets a win against Ohio State, and all of a sudden now we're talking about them being title contenders? I mean, let's be a little bit realistic with that. This team's not a title contender. Granted, sure, you can still have someone compete for a Heisman, but I just don't know if this team can compete with Georgia. I don't know if this team can compete with Alabama. I understand Alabama has one loss, but we're talking about Nick Saban. We're talking about a program that is always battling for a national championship. And I'm not discrediting them by any means, but one win against the top 5 opponent doesn't prove anything to me for Michigan because you have so many other losses. It's promising. Yes, you can quote unquote live up to the promise of Jim Harbaugh finally doing something good for the first time in his career as a college coach. But when it's all said and done, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he comes short just like he did in the Super Bowl. So we'll see what happens for Michigan moving forward. But I expect the weekend, honestly, to be hectic. And honestly, no matter, because I'm going to be honest, some team's going to fall out. I don't know who it's going to be. But based upon the committee and its favorability, I wouldn't be surprised if Notre Dame makes the playoff. I mean, they were a Vegas favorite to make it this year anyways, so you might as well play the Vegas odds for them to make it in. I know it stinks for Oklahoma State. That's right there on the borderline. I think if Alabama loses, by the way, they're out. I don't know if Alabama honestly loses. I think they end up beating Georgia in like a 3-point game, and we're going to see the two SEC powerhouses eventually maybe battle it out for a national title. Never know. Obviously, I think whoever wins that game goes to the 1 seed anyways. So we'll see what happens, and whoever likely falls to a 3. But for Cincinnati, you're playing for a lot of to stay as the 4. And if you lose, or even if Michigan loses, Notre Dame's going to probably jump. So to me, the NCAA has been hectic, but I also agree with Rahill. I want to see a team playoff in the future. We've been saying that for 2 years. It just needs to happen. If Alabama misses, it'll probably be the reason why it comes. But again, season's been hectic. I expect it to get more hectic moving forward. And the coaching changes, by the way, that you mentioned as well, were real surprising, especially with Brian Kelly. But best of luck to him in his future in the SEC. It's not an easy thing at all. But for Notre Dame, I'm not too worried about this program. They'll figure it out. They're still going to be good. It's just a fact of the matter of they need to be in a conference. And I agree with you in that.
Yeah, and if they're in the ACC for everything else, why aren't they in it now? And seriously, they could be dominant in the ACC this year. I mean, Clemson's down and all the other teams really aren't very good. So, and at least they'd be favored a little bit better and respected a little more if they won a conference championship than just basically playing their own schedule. But it's going to be really interesting to see. Of course, conference championship weekend, NFL picking up. We're in December football now. Lots of things going on. Of course, there's going to be a lot of news in baseball, maybe as early as tomorrow if a lockout happens. The NBA, we didn't even get to on this episode, but there's been a lot of chaos there. We're going to have to talk about Isaiah Stewart and LeBron James at some point on one of these episodes, but we didn't have time for it today. But Rahill, Jaiswal, Ike Busch, thanks so much for joining us today on SportsPick.
Of course, thank you.
So that'll just about wrap up today's episode. Once again, you can follow our NFL Weekly Pick'em on Twitter at SportsSpeak Live. So until next time, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off from SportsSpeak. We hope you have a great rest of your night.